First, the very first reaction from Vladimir Putin to the regular Ukrainian strikes, especially on the Russian capital. He responded during a press briefing from the Kremlin. Watch and listen.
We know and see that the regime
We see that the Kiev regime has adopted the tactic of striking our civilian facilities and infrastructure because its positions on the front line are deteriorating rapidly.
They took the army.
Kiev is losing one settlement after another as our soldiers advance.
Civilian regime and our infrastructure
are deteriorating. It is up to the Ministry of Defense and law enforcement to eliminate these threats.
What response do you expect? What revenge from Vladimir Putin? Basically, besides words?
What actions are feared? There is absolutely nothing more to fear than what they are already doing. When they bomb, absolutely 93% of Russian missiles are fired at civilian targets in Ukraine that have no connection to the military. I've even received surprising feedback from fighter pilots saying their air bases aren't being targeted anymore. That's why they're operating more freely and no longer need to defend their air bases, since Russia is targeting cities to make the population suffer. And we remember last week the attack that hit the Lavra of Kyiv, which is one of the most important traditional churches from the 11th century, as well as water treatment plants and, once again, electrical systems. There's a Russian habit of targeting culture to make the population suffer. But in reality, of course, that's not what's going to make the army collapse, and it doesn't change anything about the balance of power on the front. And contrary to what Putin says, the balance of power on the front is actually very even now, since Russia has made so little progress since 2023. They haven't made so little progress since 2023, with only 12 square kilometers captured in the entire last month, while their losses, on the other hand, remain absolutely massive.
So we've noticed something else. We've seen Russia pull its air defenses from the front line to try to protect Moscow. And we have another element. This time it's a map based on satellite images that shows what's called Putin's Ring of Fear, a map that shows another huge air defense system deployed once again around Moscow. And the fact that they're on the defensive, isn't it unprecedented since 2014 to see them switch to defensive mode like this? Well, in 2023...
They had prepared for a Ukrainian offensive, which hadn't succeeded during the major summer 2023 counteroffensive. But since that time, the Russians have tended to stockpile equipment to try to launch major offensives. Every spring, 2024 in Kharkiv, 2025 in Sumy, and 2026 more in the south, their spring offensives turned out to be major failures. Now that they're having trouble in the rear, they've had to pull some air defense back from the front. You should know that half of the Panzer systems that Russia has ever created or produced have already been destroyed, just counting the ones for which the Ukrainians have shared proof of their destruction. That means there's also much more permissiveness from Ukraine to strike at the Russian rear areas, and that's why there are so many strikes nowadays on Crimea and the south of the country, to the point that Russian logistics are increasingly affected. And to the point that Ukraine has been able to liberate almost 500 square kilometers in the south of the occupied territories, along the Sea of Azov, because in that area, Russia is really struggling to provide logistics for its fighters.
So I would like us to stop now and focus on the issue of Crimea. What is happening there is very important. Under the constant fire of Ukrainian strikes, the Crimean Peninsula seems to be turning into a trap for Moscow. There have been strikes, including recently on the Simferopol power plant, just in the last few hours. And above all, we've seen half of Crimea without electricity. That's not nothing. Infrastructure has been hit. The thermal power plant in Kerch as well. We saw a Ukrainian minister, actually the defense minister, who said a few days ago that Crimea is going to become an island. As people are saying, Xavier Teitelman, Ukraine is organizing the logistical isolation of Crimea. And if so, do you think they can achieve it, and with what consequences? So
today, the feedback I get from the officials in charge of long-range strikes, I spoke to them very recently, is that almost 2/3 of the drones they send to Crimea manage to hit their target. So that's huge. And every day, the Ukrainians share images of their results. This morning, they shared that just in terms of military equipment, $200 million worth of Russian equipment was destroyed. Very high-precision radars, 2 air defense systems, a Panzer and an S-300, and a whole series of boats, etc., are being destroyed almost every day. The images we see on the screen are the ones that actually correspond to Crimea being cut off. By repeatedly striking more than 70 kilometers behind the front lines, and because they have the freedom to move along this highway, they have reduced Crimea's supply by 70%. Trucks can no longer get through. They are being destroyed in very large numbers. 40 trucks are destroyed every day, just based on the images that the Ukrainians are able to share with us. So we know very well that oil is not only being rationed, but it is forbidden for any business or individual to buy oil anywhere in Crimea. Only state services are allowed to buy it now. So to get around these highways and railways that have been destroyed, the Russians are trying to use boats. And we know, for example, that yesterday the Ukrainians destroyed 3 of the ships that were trying to provide logistics to Crimea. So the question today is, what are they looking for? Let's be clear, the Ukrainians can't land in Crimea because there are dozens of kilometers of occupied Ukraine before reaching Crimea, but it already forces Russia to accept that it is in a position of weakness. Since the Russians are withdrawing their fighter jets from Crimea due to frequent strikes, the situation will only get more difficult as time goes on. Ukrainians want to show Putin that the longer he waits, the more suffering will occur and the less he can protect the territories he's taken. So we need to move as quickly as possible toward a ceasefire for negotiations.
So what we're hearing from you, Xavier Teitelman, is that you believe that the idea of a Ukrainian landing isn't feasible, at least not like this right now. Xavier Teitelman, I read that for the first time on the front, the Ukrainian Air Force successfully struck Russian positions using a brand new long-range precision bomb. So it has been given a name, but I won't try to say it because honestly, I wouldn't be able to. But Xavier Teitelman, what does this say about the initiative and perhaps indeed about the potential shift in the current balance of power in favor of the Ukrainians?
So it's mainly a technological breakthrough because until now, the Ukrainians were using glide bombs provided to them by the Americans with the JDAM or by the French with the AASM. And what we're seeing on the screen is the first confirmed operational use of Ukrainian glide bombs, which can be dropped from almost 60 kilometers away. Because we, France, provide them with about 60 AASM bombs per month, and the Americans give them a little more. But in the end, the Russians fire almost 3,000 glide bombs every month. However, they are less accurate than what we can provide on our side, but nevertheless, it will rebalance the balance of power, but it means something else. It also means that the Ukrainian Air Force, due to the weakening of Russian air defenses in the contact zone, well, this Ukrainian Air Force has more and more projection capability. And it's no longer just used to intercept drones. That's what our Mirage 2000s, our F-16s do. They have intercepted hundreds and thousands of Russian missiles and drones, but now they can afford it. They have enough to go to the front and drop these glide bombs. And this is also a new problem for the Russians, who until now thought they had air support and that they were the ones with a lot of fighter jets. But now that the Ukrainians can produce their own glide bombs, it took them 3 years to develop them, but now they're operational. The rise in Ukrainian production isn't only about what we can make ourselves, since we're not operating in a wartime economy. If today they're producing 2 or 3 a day, that's equivalent to what we used to supply them in a whole year. And we know very well that next month it'll be, 5 a day, because that's the Ukrainian way. With equipment, they push the button and do what's needed to boost production speed.
Xavier Teitelman, you who are constantly traveling to Ukraine, I saw the ambassador, the former French ambassador to Ukraine, Etienne de Poncin, who declared just hours ago that the question is not if Ukraine will win the war, but when. Do you agree? But me?
From the start, I knew Ukraine wouldn't collapse, so we must define what winning means. Winning for Ukraine, the simple fact that it exists, is a victory against many people who predicted its defeat and disappearance at the beginning of 2022. So today, to say that it will win, for me means that it will force Russia to kneel, and that Russia will agree to stop trying to continue conquering, even just the Donbass, which it cannot technically conquer. So yes, Ukraine and Russia will now enter an active negotiation phase in which Ukraine is in a position of strength. Because Ukraine cannot collapse militarily, it cannot collapse economically, because its economy relies on the support we provide with loans, especially the 90 billion that was provided and is based on debt repayments by Russia. And while Russia, for its part, militarily, despite all its efforts, still has 1,000 men lost per day between the wounded and the dead, and its economy is heading toward collapse, down 50%. For refined oil production this morning, there was yet another gas terminal that represents a quarter of Russian gas exports that was hit, and every day Russia sinks further economically. So structurally, they know very well that the more time passes, the harder it will get. And Putin can say whatever he wants in his narrative. They know very well that today it's Ukraine that has the positive momentum and that they won't be able to turn the situation around.